Some places close their doors for good, but never really let go of the things that happened inside them. A locked room does not erase the screams that once filled it. A sealed corridor does not smother the breath of those who begged within it. And a building abandoned to time does not truly die. It waits, it listens, it remembers. Tonight we return to Brookhaven, Pennsylvania, a quiet town, surrounded by forests, where the fog clings low to the earth, as if it does not want to let go. To outsiders, Brookhaven is unremarkable. A scattering of houses, a single church steeple, rising above the trees and streets that fall eerily silent, once the sun dips below the horizon. But if you ask the people who grew up there, they will tell you, the silence of Brookhaven is not natural. It is heavy. It feels deliberate, as if it comes from something watching just beyond sight, holding its breath. At the center of this silence is the ghost of a place that officially should not exist anymore. Brookhaven State Asylum, a hospital that disappeared from history, almost overnight. Not because of fire, not because of bankruptcy, but because of something else, something never meant to be seen. The building still stands though. Most people pretend not to notice it. They drive faster when they pass its cracked gates. They avoid the road that leads into the woods, even if it is the shortest way home. And the children who once dared each other to touch its rusted fence, learned quickly that some dares are not worth taking. This is the story of Ward C, the wing of the asylum that was erased from records locked behind iron doors and left to rot. A place where the human mind was tested and broken, and where something else may have been waiting in the silence. Brookhaven Asylum was built in 1927 on land that had already earned a reputation. Farmers claimed their livestock refused to graze near the hilltop. Hunters said the woods grew unnaturally quiet. At dusk, as if every living thing knew to flee, the asylum rose from that hill like a monument of brick and iron. Its architects believed in confinement, not comfort. Windows were narrow, doors were thick, and underground tunnels wound deep beneath the earth, where no sunlight ever reached. To the townsfolk it became more than just a hospital. It became a warning, a place where the broken were sent, and rarely returned. Patients admitted often vanished from memory. Families stopped speaking their names, and Brookhaven itself developed an unspoken rule. Do not ask questions about the asylum. Do not speak of what you hear at night. And above all, do not go near it. Even after it closed the asylum, never let the town forget. Old nurses whispered about things they saw on night shifts, shadows moving in locked rooms, patients speaking languages they had never learned, voices echoing from empty halls. The police kept reports quiet. The newspapers avoided the subject, but in every diner, every church pew, every cracked bar stool, the same phrase could be heard. The walls remember. Some believed the asylum was cursed, others said it was haunted by the patients who suffered inside, and a few whispered of experiments that were never meant to be spoken of. Experiments that created something far worse than madness, and at the heart of these whispers was always the same place, Ward C. The town wanted to forget. They bricked up the hallways, locked the iron gates, and erased the names from the records. They told themselves it was over. But some buildings never forget. Some places are alive. And tonight you will see what Brookhaven tried to bury. The story of the forgotten wing. The story of Ward C.
Screams of the Mind is not just a collection of horror. It is a doorway, a place where the voices of shadows are given form, a place for the restless, the haunted, the curious, and the broken. Every single day, I bring you bone-chilling tales, psychological terrors, creeping truths that claw their way out of silence, disturbing memories that were never meant to be spoken aloud. Urban legends, paranormal encounters, nightmares that slipped out of the dream and walked into waking life. This channel is not safe, but it is necessary. Because once you have heard what waits in the dark, you will need somewhere to return to. Somewhere that reminds you that you are not alone when the scratching starts behind your walls, when the reflection shifts, when the shadows at the edge of your room hold still just a little too long. So I welcome you Welcome to the darkest corner of the mind. Welcome to the echoes you were never meant to hear. Welcome to Screams of the Mind, the darkest corner where fears are given. A voice, subscribe now and turn on the bell icon. You will need a place to come back to when the reflection changes. Now, let's begin.
Chapter 1. Brookhaven Asylum. Opened in 1927, at the height of America's mental health crisis. It was a time when fear was disguised as medicine, when families unable to handle depression, epilepsy, or simple eccentricity surrendered their loved ones to the state. Institutions multiplied across the country, each promising relief, but delivering only confinement. Brookhaven was one of these places, but even in its earliest days, there was something about it that stood apart. It did not heal. It consumed. The building was massive red brick iron gates and narrow windows that barely allowed the light inside. At night it looked less like a hospital and more like a fortress built to keep something in. By the 1940s, Brookhaven was overflowing. Designed for 300, it held nearly 1,000. 3 patients to every bed. Men and women, pressed shoulder to shoulder, in narrow cots. The smell was the first thing new nurses wrote about in their journals. A mixture of bleach, sweat, and something sour. Something like rot. Hallways echoed with cries that never stopped. Some sharp and violent. Others long-drawn sobs that seeped into the walls until the building itself seemed to mourn. Meals were barely food. Thin broth. Dry bread, sometimes spoiled meat. Patients fought over crumbs, like animals. Yet to the outside world, Brookhaven remained a proud institution. Its doctors stood in photographs, white coats, and forced smiles, insisting they were pioneers. But if you stepped past the polished front entrance, the truth was clear. Brookhaven was not curing anyone. It was breaking them. Treatment here was not mercy. It was obedience. Shock therapy became routine. Electrodes pressed against trembling skulls, convulsions echoing through the ward like thunder. Nurses were told not to meet patients' eyes. Ice baths followed. Some lasted minutes, others hours. A punishment, disguised as cure. And when those failed, doctors turned to lobotomies. Dozens performed in a week. Patients returned with blank stares, shuffling footsteps, drool on their chins. It was not treatment. It was erasure. But even these horrors were only the surface, because beneath the asylum, something worse was being built. Deep in the basement, where no patient's family was allowed a new wing, was constructed. It did not appear on blueprints. It did not appear in budgets. Later documents revealed its name, Ward C. Ward C was described as an experimental unit for long-term silence therapy. The concept was chilling in its simplicity. Patients considered disruptive, violent, or too loud were placed in total isolation. No sound, no light, no contact. Their rooms were padded, not for safety, but to swallow every echo. Meals were slid through slots in the door, the walls layered so thick that even screams could not escape. Doctors claimed silence would calm the fractured mind, but nurses told a different story. Patients sent, there were never the same. Some returned whispering endlessly, their words looping without meaning. Others screamed at shadows only they could see, their nails torn bloody from clawing walls. One refused food unless fed in pitch black. Another begged, "Do not let the quiet take me again." Staff, too, began to notice. Nurses swore they heard whispers behind doors, not from patients, but from the walls themselves. One doctor wrote in his notes, "We are not treating the illness, we are feeding it." By 1961, staff began disappearing. A nurse vanished. A janitor left only his cart. Ward C was sealed. The asylum closed. The town pretended it was over. But on still nights, the whispers of Ward C can still be heard, and they sound hungry. Chapter 2. Long after the gates of Brookhaven Asylum rusted shut, the building itself remained. A hulking skeleton of red brick, its windows shattered like blackened teeth. The official story was simple. The asylum closed in 1961, its patients transferred elsewhere, its history forgotten. But in Brookhaven, Pennsylvania, the story never died. For decades, locals whispered about the place. They said the walls still remembered, that the halls carried echoes of the patients locked away inside, and the stories began to spread. Stories that turned Brookhaven Asylum into something far more dangerous than a ruin. It became an urban legend. Teenagers dared each other to step onto the grounds at night. Some were brave enough to touch the gate. Fewer climbed over it. Those who did returned pale and shaken. They spoke of shadows moving in the broken windows, not just shapes, but figures standing still as if waiting to be seen. Hunters swore that at dawn they saw silhouettes walking across the third-floor hallways, where no floorboards remained. And then there were the voices. Not just any voices, but their own. Imagine standing before the ruins, and hearing yourself whispering from inside the building, words you never said, sentences you never spoke. Parents in town gave warnings to their children. Don't go near Brookhaven. The walls talk, but warnings only make curiosity grow stronger. By the 1990s, when camcorders became common, the asylum became a magnet. Urban explorers sneaked in, recording their adventures for proof. Most of their tapes showed only mold-stained walls, collapsed ceilings, and graffiti. But even those empty rooms carried a heaviness. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, a silence that feels like it is listening. And then came the stories they could not laugh away. One explorer swore his battery drained the moment he stepped onto the basement stairs. His camcorder went dead in his hands, but the red recording light stayed on. Another said he entered the patient wing and heard shackles clattering on the tiles. He thought it was a prank from his friends, but when he turned the corner, there was no one there, only a single chain lying in the dust. And then there were the figures, a woman in white staring from a third-floor window, a child's hand pressed against the glass, though the entire floor had collapsed. Decades earlier, and the most infamous sighting of all, the shackled figure, thin hollow-eyed chains dragging from its wrists and ankles, seen only in the basement windows. Always in the basement, locals near the grounds spoke of something worse than shadows. They said Brookhaven did not just haunt those who entered. It called them. Men on night shifts heard their names whispered across empty fields. Drivers at night swore they felt compelled to slow down their eyes, locked on shattered windows, until they nearly veered from the road. And those who stepped inside said they heard their own voices calling them deeper. Not echoes, not recordings, their own voices, speaking words they never thought. Words like "stay with me," words like "don't leave." By the early 2000s, the legend grew too strong to ignore. Urban explorers no longer went for fun, they went for proof. And one group found more than they wanted. 3 teenagers, armed with flashlights and a camcorder, entered through the basement window on a cold October night. The tape began with laughter, but it ended with screams. And in those final seconds before the camera died, a figure was waiting, shackled, hollow-eyed, watching from the basement window. Chapter 3. It was the summer of 2003. Mark, Jenna, and Chris were college students at a small state university, majoring in film. Like so many before them, they had heard the whispers about Brookhaven Asylum, the haunted stories, the warnings, the so-called lost tape. But they did not believe in ghosts. To them it was the perfect location for their new student documentary, a film about abandoned places, urban decay, and forgotten history. That summer night was humid, heavy, the kind of heat that clung to skin and slowed every breath. At 11:47 p.m., they parked 3 blocks away and walked the last stretch in silence. Ahead of them, Brookhaven's silhouette rose against the stars, broken windows like hollow eyes, red brick walls sagging under decades of neglect. The gates were locked with chains thick as a man's wrist, but the fence beside it leaned just enough. They slipped through the gap, and the moment their feet touched the asylum grounds, the cicadas stopped singing. At first, Brookhaven was exactly what they expected. Collapsed ceilings, gaped open to the stars. Wallpaper curled away in rotting strips. Old wheelchairs sat abandoned in corners, their wheels frozen by rust, their leather seats cracked and peeling. Graffiti stretched across the walls, layers of names, dates and vulgar drawings, left by trespassers who had come before Mark led the way. His camcorder light cutting sharp cones through the dust. He was the loudest of the three, joking, laughing, nervously filling the silence with words no one really needed. Jenna followed, quieter, her camcorder raised, but her gaze darting constantly to the shadows. She hated how the air felt inside, damp, thick, like the building itself was breathing. Chris brought up the rear. He was the most hesitant. His camera rarely rose from his chest. He kept glancing back toward the doorway they had entered, as though making sure it was still there. But soon little things began to feel wrong. A door creaked open behind them, deliberate and patient. Every time they turned a corner, the wheelchairs seemed to be facing them, and in the dust, fresh footprints appeared, footprints that did not match their shoes. By midnight, they found themselves in the basement stairwell. The air grew colder as they descended, damp and sharp, carrying the sour scent of mildew, mixed with something stronger. Mark's light caught a rusted gurney at the bottom of the stairs, its wheels locked at an angle, as though it had been abandoned mid-run. Straps still dangled from its sides. The three of them exchanged glances. No one spoke, and then they saw it. The wall at the far end of the corridor. Unlike the rest of the crumbling stone, it was newer. Bricks stacked haphazardly, mortar uneven, the red darker than the rest. It was a wall that was never meant to be there. A wall hiding something. Ward C. The secret wing of Brookhaven. Mark squeezed through first, laughing nervously, as his camcorder flickered with static. Jenna muttered about the stench, saying it smelled like rot and mold. Chris hesitated, every part of him screaming to turn back, but he stepped through. The hallway stretched before them, lined with cells, chains dangling, soundproofing foam, rotting and wet. Then they saw the carving, scratched into a cell door, jagged and desperate. Don't listen to the whisper. Chris froze, because he thought he heard something from the vent above. Chapter 4. Deeper into Ward C. The air grew heavier. The walls narrowed, pressing closer, as though the building itself wanted to swallow them whole. Paint peeled in jagged strips. Rust ate away at hinges and doorknobs. The smell of rot thickened, until it coated their tongues. They followed the hallway, until it dead-ended into a room, with shattered glass panels. The remains of an office. The sign on the door was so corroded, it was unreadable, but inside, it was clear this had once been where the staff kept their records, their secrets. Folders lay scattered across the floor, half buried beneath crumbling plaster. Paper disintegrated at the touch. Black mold bloomed across the desks, eating away at the past. Mark kicked through the debris, his light catching scraps of medical charts, half-legible reports, notes smeared with time and dampness. Jenna raised her camcorder, zooming in on what remained, but most of it was destroyed, useless. All except one. It lay in the center of the desk, a single manila folder, the label almost washed away by years of water damage, the edges curled, spotted black, with mold. But the words on the front were still visible. Patient 92. Chris picked it up. His hands trembled slightly as he brushed away the dust. Inside were only a handful of pages, but the ink had survived, and the words were chilling. The first page was clinical short notes, typed in cold, efficient language. Subject claims silence allows voices to grow. Mark leaned closer, squinting. What the hell does that mean? He muttered. Chris turned the page. Resists all forms of sedation. Jenna's breath hitched. Resists, like they could not keep him under. Chris kept reading. Exhibits knowledge of languages unknown to staff. Mark laughed nervously, shaking his head. Probably some trick. Maybe the guy was just smart, messing with them. But Jenna's eyes did not leave the page. Chris read the next line aloud, his voice unsteady. speaks of a chorus that calls to him. A long silence followed. Even Mark did not laugh this time. The last entry was handwritten, the ink pressed deep, the strokes frantic, as though the writer's hand shook as they wrote it. Do not keep him in silence. The silence makes him stronger. Chris's mouth went dry as he whispered the words aloud, and as the last syllable left his lips, the room shifted. The whispers began again, but this time, they were not faint. They were not one voice. They were many, layered overlapping hundreds of voices, weaving together, in a chorus of madness. Some screamed, some wept, some whispered in tongues no one recognized. It was a sound that did not just echo through the room. It sank into their bones. The vent above them rattled, violently. Dust raining down. Jenna dropped her camera with a gasp. Mark's light shot upward, trembling, and behind the grate, something moved. At first, it was only a shadow, a shift of pale against the darkness, but then it leaned closer. Something pressed against the grate, stretching the thin mesh outward, as though testing its strength. Skin gray, waxy skin, an eye milky and lidless rolled into view, staring at them. Mark swore, stumbling back. His camera flickered with static. Jenna clutched Chris's arm, nails breaking skin, and the voices grew louder, not whispers anymore, but a single command, repeated by hundreds of mouths at once. Let me out. The screws rattled, one clattering to the floor. Fingers long thin bone, white slipped through, curling into the air. Jenna screamed, dragging Chris back, but the folder lay open on the floor. Fresh ink glistened on the last page. 3 new words, "Don't leave me," and the handwriting was Chris's own. Chapter 5. They ran, clutching their flashlights. Tripping over broken tiles and scattered debris, they sprinted for the exit, but the asylum refused to let them go. The corridors twisted like intestines. A door, they swore, led back to the stairwell, only opened into another hallway. Another door spat them out, into the same ruined office. Every path circled back. Every escape was swallowed by Brookhaven itself, and the whispers, they didn't fade. They grew, but worse, they became personal. Jenna froze mid-step when she heard a soft, trembling voice call her name. Jenna. It was her mother's voice, the exact tone she used when waking her as a child. Gentle, loving. Jenna's eyes filled with tears. "Mom," she whispered. Chris grabbed her arm. "Don't listen to it. It's not real." But then Mark laughed. A sharp, nervous laugh that echoed down the hall, except it wasn't him. The sound came from ahead, from the shadows. His own laughter bounced back at him. Cruel, mocking, growing louder, until it no longer sounded human. Mark's breath hitched. He clutched his head, whispering, "That's me, that's me." And Chris heard something else. Not his family, not himself, but a voice he had never wanted to hear again. "You brought me back," it hissed from the darkness, heavy with accusation, and Chris felt certain he had awakened it. Their flashlights sputtered beams, cutting through the dust, choked dark, but something was wrong. The shadows on the walls didn't match. When Jenna lifted her light, the silhouette on the wall stretched too far, bending at impossible angles. When Mark moved his arm, the shadow lingered half a second too long before catching up, and Chris's shadow didn't move at all. It just stood there, frozen arms at its side, staring back at him, with its head tilted. "No," Chris whispered, stumbling backward. "That's not me. That's not me." The frozen shadow twitched and smiled at the far end of the hall. The air thickened, and then they saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness. Thin, shackled, gaunt, patient 92. He didn't walk. He drifted, his feet hovered just above the cracked floor chains, dragging behind, grinding metal against stone. His body twitched with every movement, like a marionette on invisible strings, and his face skin stretched too tight, lips dry and cracked, eyes like empty wells, staring straight through them. His mouth moved, opening and closing as though trying to form words, but no sound came. Instead, the whispers exploded, 1,000 voices, deafening, layered the walls themselves, screaming, and woven through them. All was one command: stay. Mark raised his camera, his hands shaking violently. This is it. Oh God. This is it. Jenna slapped the camera down, her voice breaking. We have to go, but every direction was wrong. Every hallway curved back on itself. Every door spat them into another version of the same place. And all the while, patient, 92 drifted closer chains, scraping, dragging, pulling the asylum with him. The building groaned like a living thing, walls shuddering as though sharing his hunger, and the lights, their flashlights, the emergency signs, the faint glow from broken windows, all flickered together, syncing to one rhythm, like a heartbeat that wasn't theirs. The asylum was alive, and it wanted them. They clung to each other, gasping, choking on the stench of rot and dust. Jenna's tears streaked her cheeks as she whispered, "We'll never get out. We'll never get out." Chris shook his head violently, refusing to accept it. There's a way, there has to be. And then his flashlight beam caught something. A door. A stairwell door. Its faded red paint, peeling the word exit, barely visible beneath years of decay. Hope surged through them. They bolted for it, chains rattling louder, closer, faster. Mark shoved the door open, the hinges. Shrieking, they stumbled into the stairwell, only to freeze because the staircase didn't go up. It only went down. Chapter 6. They ran through corridors that bent like snakes past doors that slammed shut the instant they crossed their thresholds, past shattered windows where shadows pressed against the glass palms, flattening faces, distorting as if desperate. To break through every step was chaos. Every corner led to more darkness. Their lungs burned, their legs screamed, but terror kept them moving. And then they saw it. A wall crumbled, fractured from age, the bricks loose, the mortar split. Mark didn't hesitate. He slammed his shoulder against it. Once, twice, 3 times, until the weakened stone gave way, spilling into the basement. Beyond, dust filled the air, choking them as they stumbled through the jagged gap. And then the whispers stopped instantly, like someone had thrown a switch. Silence swallowed them whole. At first they thought it was relief, but this silence was wrong. It wasn't comforting. It was heavy, watching, waiting. Every drip of water echoed too loudly. Every shuffle of their feet seemed amplified, like the walls were listening. Jenna hugged herself, trembling. "I can't hear them anymore," she whispered, almost afraid her words would carry. Chris swallowed hard. "Don't trust it. Silence isn't safer. Not here." Mark lifted his camera, the tiny red light still blinking. His voice cracked. It's still recording somehow. That made the silence worse, because if the whispers were gone, why was the camera still picking up sound? They moved cautiously through the basement pipes, hung low from the ceiling. Dripping rust-colored water, rust flaked under their shoes. The walls down here were older than the rest, lined with damp stone instead of plaster, carved out like tunnels, rather than rooms. And all the while their flashlights caught things that shouldn't have been there. Handprints, hundreds of them smeared across the walls, the ceilings overlapping in chaotic clusters. Some were small, childlike, others were enormous. Fingers far too long. Mark's camera shook as he filmed them. His voice trembled. "These aren't old, they're wet." Jenna touched one before Chris yanked her back. Her fingertips glistened, fresh as if someone or something had just pressed its hand there. Then, at the far end of the basement, they saw it, a door, faded, red paint rust, eating away the hinges above it. A broken exit sign flickered faintly, one last dying heartbeat of electricity. They didn't speak, they just ran. Mark shoved it first, grunting his shoulder, straining until the rusted hinges screamed, and then the door burst open. Cold air rushed in, real air, not the stale rot of the asylum, but damp night air from the world outside. For the first time they could breathe. They stumbled out into the night. The asylum loomed behind them, its broken windows glowing faintly with moonlight, its shattered silhouette clawing into the sky. None of them looked back. Not once. Their bodies were trembling, their clothes soaked in sweat, their breaths ragged and uneven. But they were alive. 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 They left Brookhaven behind. Or at least they thought they did. Because silence doesn't last the night they escaped. Each of them swore they still heard things. Jenna woke to her phone buzzing at 3:03 a.m. a voicemail, with no number. When she played it, all she heard was her mother's voice whispering, "Jenna. Jenna, let me in." Mark's camera, the footage he swore had been running the whole time, showed more than he remembered. In several shots, even when they were alone, another figure appeared in the frame, thin, shackled, gaunt, always at the edge of the light. And Chris heard whispers again, but not from his phone, not from recordings from the vents in his own apartment, from the silence of his own room. Patient 92 had followed them. Brookhaven hadn't kept him locked away, they had carried him out. Chapter 7. 2 months passed since Brookhaven Asylum, 2 months since the silence, but they had not escaped it. None of them did. Mark was the first to vanish. Friends said he became obsessive. He stopped going to class, stopped answering calls, stopped leaving his apartment. But the lights in his room never went out. The blinds were always drawn, and through the walls neighbors swore they could hear laughter, not his higher thinner, like someone else was in there with him. Then one night, his landlord unlocked the door. The apartment was empty, the bed unmade, food left half-eaten, and in the center of the living room, his camcorder still recording. The red light blinked, battery nearly drained. When the police reviewed the tape, it was nothing but static, hours and hours of static. But when the volume was raised, a voice bled through, layered, distorted, and in between the crackle, one phrase repeated, again and again, "Do not keep me in silence." Jenna refused to leave her house. Her friends begged her, called her, pounded on her door. But she never opened it. She said she could not stand the silence anymore. Not even for a second. The television was always on, the radio blaring, sometimes both at once, every channel buzzing with sound, until her house was a wall of noise. But even then, the whispers broke through. Friends who visited said they saw her, pacing, muttering, clamping her hands over her ears. She told them the silence was following her, that when the TV flickered out for even a moment, she could hear them, not just around her, but inside her, voices layered over voices, pressing, begging, pleading. One night her neighbor heard a scream, so sharp, it cracked glass. By the time police broke down the door, the house was still lit, the TV still buzzing, the radio still humming, but Jenna was gone. The only thing left was a single sentence carved into the plaster of her living room wall, deep, bloody. The whispers never end. Chris was the last out of all three. He seemed the most shaken after Brookhaven. He stopped speaking in class, stopped eating with friends. He started wandering. People saw him, late at night, drifting through campus, muttering under his breath. Not words anyone recognized. Not English. Not anything human. And then he was spotted, standing outside the gates of Brookhaven Asylum, alone, his lips moving, repeating the same phrase, over and over. The silence makes him stronger. Witnesses said he was not talking to himself. He was listening, nodding, as if someone or something was speaking. Back when police searched the grounds. The next morning, the gates were still chained. The asylum still sealed. But Chris was gone, vanished, and scratched into the rusted metal of the gates was a single word: open. Some say, patient 92 never left Brookhaven, that he is still waiting in the silence, feeding on those who listen too long. But others believe Mark, Jenna, and Chris did not just vanish. They carried him out piece by piece, through their voices, through their recordings, through the silence itself. And maybe if you have listened this far, you have carried him out too. So tonight I ask you, what do you believe was Ward C? Just a forgotten experiment, a relic of madness and cruelty buried beneath the hospital's crumbling walls? Or was it something darker, a prison not for the broken, but for something that should never have been set free? Mark thought he could capture it on film. Jenna thought she could drown it out with noise. Chris thought he could understand it, but the silence took them all. And if the silence can take them, what makes you so sure it will not take you? I want to know what you think was Patient 92. Just a story, or do whispers like his live, on waiting in the cracks of silence, crawling into the minds of those who dare to listen too closely? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and maybe, just maybe, I will find your story waiting there, because the shadows, they do not end with me. They live inside all of us. You have been listening to Screams of the Mind, the darkest corner where your fears are given a voice every night. I bring you bone-chilling horror stories, psychological nightmares, twisted true tales, and shadows that never quite let go. This is a place for those who dare to step deeper into the dark. For those who know that fear is not just a story, it is a reflection. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join me tomorrow night, when we take another step deeper into the shadows. And remember, if you ever hear a whisper in the silence, do not turn away. Do not convince yourself it was nothing, because sometimes the whisper is not coming from outside. Sometimes it has already crossed the threshold, waiting, breathing, patient. And in that silence, when the world holds its breath, when the lights flicker, and the walls hum with something you cannot explain, you may realize the whisper is already inside your head, crawling through your thoughts, twisting your fears, feeding on the quiet that you tried to ignore. You think you are safe because you are listening to a story, but every story has a door, and every word is a key, and maybe by listening, you have opened something you cannot close. The silence is watching, the silence is listening, and the silence is hungry. So if you ever wake in the dead of night, if the room is still, and the shadows feel closer, lean in and listen carefully, because if you hear it even once, you will never forget it. The whisper is waiting, and it has already found you.